manifesto, which said it wouldn't increase national insurance.
Well, it's a lie. They lied in their manifesto, and it is the opposite of what they said they will do, which is increase growth. And this is because they fundamentally don't believe in free market capitalism. This is a very socialist budget. This is saying the only way we're going to generate growth is have the government spend more money. That's what lots of socialist regimes have tried to do over the ages. They've all failed, because what we know is the only economies that successfully generate jobs and opportunities are free market economies.
Yes, that's Liz Truss saying the Labour Party is secretly carrying out socialist agendas. But how does she know? Well, Liz Truss indeed remained British Prime Minister for less than 2 months. However, while being in the Prime Minister's seat, she got to witness some of the groundbreaking and hidden things about British politics. At that time, she could not disclose them, but today she has opened herself. She has said things that literally changed the British political landscape and what Britons believed about their leaders. She laid her hands on the evidence while she was the Prime Minister, which mainly focused on what the Labour Party secretly did and what were the questionable actions of Keir Starmer when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions. So, what has she revealed that puts Starmer's political career under threat? In this video, let's find out. Keir Starmer's past has recently come under intense scrutiny, particularly in light of revelations from Liz Truss's access to classified documents. These findings paint a very different picture of Starmer than the one he has carefully crafted for the public. His career, especially his tenure as Director of Public Prosecutions, or DPP, is now under the microscope, revealing a pattern of actions that raise serious questions about his integrity and motivations.
Questions remain: how many people did Al-Fayed target? How many knew and protected him? And beyond Harrods, his ownership of Fulham also under the spotlight. A former manager at the club says extra precautions were put in place to protect female players. Fulham say they're concerned by reports from his former employees and are investigating. Questions too today for the Crown Prosecution Service, which it's now claimed twice failed to bring charges against the late billionaire. One instance in 2009, already widely reported. The CPS said it had insufficient evidence to prosecute. Now another in 2015, when the Metropolitan Police sent a file to them following allegations of rape by another victim. In a statement, they said, "We reviewed files of evidence presented by the police in 2009 and 2015. To bring a prosecution, the CPS must be confident there's a realistic prospect of conviction. In each instance, our prosecutors looked carefully at the evidence and concluded this wasn't the..."
While Starmer presented himself as a principled lawyer committed to justice, Truss's insights suggest that his rise to power was far from accidental and that much of his public persona was a calculated construction. Today, it can be seen that Starmer did favour elites, shielding them from facing justice. Even Liz Truss revealed the Labour Party never put its hands on the powerful groups.
We've delivered on national insurance. We are going to deliver to stop the militant trade unions disrupting our railways. The honourable gentleman has no idea, he has no plan, and he has no...
But let's go back a little. Starmer's appointment as DPP in 2008 seemed like an odd choice at first, given his background as a left-wing lawyer who had defended marginalised groups. However, according to Truss's review of government documents, it appears that his appointment was more of a strategic manoeuvre than a natural progression in his career. Far from being a spontaneous decision, Starmer's move into the DPP role served to neutralise opposition within the legal community and to project an image of impartiality that would make it easier to align with the government's interests. His reputation as a man of the people allowed him to present himself as unbiased, even as he implemented policies that mirrored the priorities of the government in power. This duplicity, Truss argues, was a hallmark of Starmer's approach throughout his tenure, setting the stage for many of the controversial decisions that followed. One of the most damning aspects of Starmer's time as DPP was his involvement in the Julian Assange case, which became a focal point for Truss's investigation. Starmer made several trips to Washington during his time as DPP, coinciding with the height of Assange's legal battles. The Crown Prosecution Service, under his leadership, made decisions that extended Assange's detention and worked in favour of US interests, rather than adhering to standard legal procedures.
When you get a right-wing politician like David Davis saying that Assange is a political prisoner, everyone knows it. The Guardian know it, who took his stories and then disowned him. The BBC knows it. Channel 4 knows it. Every serious editor of a current affairs programme, of a national newspaper, knows this is the truth, and yet they are silent. The journalists are silent. The lawyers are silent. Now, why are lawyers silent when they see our legal system so traduced? When an essential feature of our constitution is the separation of powers. The executive and the legal system are meant to be separate, and yet this is plainly not the case, as this film has demonstrated, and is plain to everyone to see. Where are they? Where are the politicians? Keir Starmer finds himself in a very interesting position. He was head of the prosecution service. Was he head when the message went through to Sweden to keep that case going? Was he there? What does he know? He should be challenged. He should be challenged. This is a test for him in particular, but all the politicians should speak up. Starmer speaks of openness in his dealings. We'll let him be open about this, and let's hear what he says about the torture and the illegal oppression of Julian Assange.
Truss noted that documents suggested deliberate delays in Assange's case, including advising Swedish officials not to conduct an interview with Assange in London, which could have resolved the matter sooner. What's more troubling is the destruction of key records related to Starmer's trips to the US, which, according to Truss, suggests an attempt to conceal these activities. The CPS claimed the records were destroyed as part of routine document retention policies, but as Truss points out, these policies were unusually vague and inconsistent, particularly when it came to a case as high-profile as Assange's. Truss's findings also raise questions about the meetings Starmer held with US officials during his trips to Washington. These were not casual meetings, but rather high-level discussions that involved figures deeply involved in US national security. For example, Starmer met with US Attorney General Eric Holder and other key officials during his visits, including individuals like Lisa Monaco, who oversaw US intelligence, and Bruce Swartz, a national security figure. The discussions reportedly focused on issues such as extradition and intelligence sharing, areas far beyond the DPP's official responsibilities. This raises serious concerns. Was Starmer using his position to coordinate directly with US authorities on the Assange case, bypassing standard UK procedures? What agreements were made during these meetings, and how did they align with US interests? The destruction of records of these meetings on the UK side, contrasted with the retention of US documents, only deepens the mystery. Beyond his handling of the Assange case, Starmer's broader record as DPP reveals a troubling alignment with the government's conservative agenda. Truss highlighted two key policies that reflect this: his guidance on prosecuting protesters and his stance on benefits fraud. In both cases, Starmer's rhetoric mirrored right-wing talking points, framing protesters as criminals and criminalizing welfare claimants in ways that aligned with tabloid stereotypes. But why did he do it? Well, the report shows he was allowed to use public money as much as he wanted in return for doing things the government wanted.
The report claims that Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer billed taxpayers for almost £250,000 in travel costs whilst he was Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, according to reports, Starmer claimed almost 3 times as much as his successor, Alison Saunders, including first-class flights and a chauffeur-driven car, charging you, the taxpayer, a whopping £161,273 for the car and driver. That's alone, so that's just the car and driver, even though he lived just a few miles.
His decision to crack down on individuals suspected of getting one over on the system was a clear appeal to right-wing media narratives, and the timing of these policies during austerity protests seemed more about suppressing dissent than upholding justice. Truss argues that this approach served to distract from more systemic issues like corporate tax evasion by targeting vulnerable populations who were less likely to fight back. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel for more exclusive videos on the groundbreaking changes happening in British politics. Let's continue now. Truss's revelation also uncovered a pattern of hypocrisy in Starmer's dealings with foreign officials. His frequent trips to Washington, where he met with high-ranking US figures, suggest that Starmer may have been acting more as a diplomat or intelligence liaison than a prosecutor. These unauthorized foreign engagements raise serious ethical questions. Why was Starmer meeting with national security officials, and why were these meetings kept secret? Truss's documents suggest that these interactions were not incidental, but part of a broader strategy to align UK legal actions with US national security interests, further blurring the lines between Starmer's role as DPP and his political ambitions. Throughout his career, Starmer has carefully crafted an image of a principled legal figure, a defender of justice. But Truss's revelations suggest that this image is a mask, carefully cultivated to hide a more complicated and morally questionable reality. In public, Starmer has positioned himself as a champion of human rights, even supporting the Human Rights Act. Yet, behind closed doors, his decisions as DPP often undermined those very rights, particularly for marginalized groups. However, things don't stop there. One of the most shocking aspects of Starmer's legacy as DPP is his involvement in the case of Jimmy Savile, the infamous British media personality whose sexual abuse of vulnerable, underage girls remained hidden for decades.
This leader of the opposition, a former director of public prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, so he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker. He, Mr. Speaker, chose to use this moment. He used this moment, Mr. Speaker, continually to prejudge a police inquiry. That's what he chose to do. He's reached his conclusions about it. I'm not going to reach any conclusions, and he would be entirely wrong to...
Obviously knew about the investigation into Jimmy Savile, but I thought at that time that there simply wasn't the evidence. The testimony simply wasn't compelling. Also, Savile did have a great standing with people, and so the threshold for any action taken was always going to be higher, and some of the claims felt slightly frivolous. We felt that threshold wasn't met at that.
Despite multiple reports and credible allegations against Savile from as early as the 1970s, the authorities failed to take action, and the case was shut down when police began to gather evidence in 2007. At the time, Starmer was leading the CPS. Truss's revelations suggest that Starmer and his agency played a direct role in torpedoing the investigation, despite clear evidence that Savile was a serial predator. Shockingly, CPS files related to Savile were destroyed in 2010, in violation of retention policies. Truss's documents reveal that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of erasing key records under Starmer's leadership. The destruction of these files left little trace of the CPS's involvement in the decision not to prosecute Savile, and it raises serious questions about who authorized this destruction and why.
I would describe Savile as a predatory serial sex offender. He was an opportunist who at times would also groom children or young people as part of his offending, but basically this whole sordid affair has shown the tragic consequences of when vulnerability collides with power. He exploited his celebrity status. He traded on the currency of celebrity to get himself almost unprecedented access to our institutions, to our hospitals, to our schools, and there he took advantage of the most vulnerable in society, adults and children, although sadly primarily children, and for his own sexual gratification.
Back in 2012, when Saval's crimes were finally exposed, Starmer ordered an inquiry into why the CPS had failed to act on the case earlier. However, Truss's findings suggest that this inquiry, which was conducted by Alison Levitt, Starmer's chief legal advisor, failed to hold anyone accountable within the CPS. Instead, the blame was shifted to the police. Levitt's report concluded that the police were at fault for not following through on the allegations, but it failed to acknowledge the critical role that the CPS, under Starmer's leadership, had played in halting the investigation. This report was crucial in absolving Starmer and his agency of responsibility for a scandal that would ultimately implicate many of the most powerful institutions in the UK, including the BBC, the NHS, and the police force.
To the senior executives at the BBC, this report does nothing. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help us victims. You admit it happened, but you've known for a long time, and you're only acting on the recommendations of the report. You should have been acting years ago. They must have known. There was too much going on. I was taken to the BBC personally for 2 years by an employee of the BBC that is named in the report. He has since died as a convicted paedophile. He passed me around several people over a 2-year period. How could people have not known why an 8-year-old girl was passed around the BBC and used and abused and nobody knew? It's impossible.
Starmer's record also includes a troubling pattern of failing to prosecute individuals who were protected by powerful networks. Another example of this comes from the case of Mohammed Al-Fayed, the former owner of Harrods, who was accused of sexually assaulting a young girl in 2008. Despite the girl's testimony and the fact that Fayed had a well-documented history of abusing women, the CPS, under Starmer's leadership, decided not to bring charges. Truss's revelation reveals that Starmer's office was directly involved in this decision, which many saw as a clear instance of elite protection. The failure to prosecute Fayed, coupled with the lack of action on Saval's case, show a pattern of Starmer failing to hold powerful figures accountable, even when the evidence was clear.
I'm afraid at that time, I think we know that the CPS were involved from 2015, 2018, 2021, or more or less the period I was the Victims Commissioner. And I mean, the CPS was frankly just a sort of den of negativity for all sexual offence allegations and for the people who made them. They had put a very high premium on their conviction rate, which means that they would only take, at that time, cases that had a 62%, I think it was, chance of success. It's usually 50. So they made it deliberately difficult because they wanted to only take cases they could win. They have always been valued for the proportion of cases they win. So you do 20 and you get 15, 75%, that's good. But if you only do 10, because 10 are really, really safe, and there'll only be 10 that are, then you get nine of them, and that is a super rate of conviction. And that, I'm afraid, their interests mitigated for all of that time against the interests of people who severely needed to have the help of the criminal justice system to get over the awful way that they were treated by their assailants. And now it's very clear that Mr. Al-Fayed was one of those.
In addition to his role in covering up abuse cases, Truss's findings suggest that Starmer's time at the CPS was marked by a broader tendency to align with the interests of the political establishment. Whether it was protecting intelligence agencies, failing to pursue high-profile prosecutions, or engaging in unauthorized diplomatic activities, Starmer's tenure at the CPS was characterized by a pattern of secrecy, complicity, and selective justice. That's true that people really don't know the real Starmer.
Your argument is we have fundamentally misunderstood Keir Starmer.
His messianic streak is about my destiny is to rebuild the country. That's going to be very, very difficult, and it's going to annoy lots of groups of people around the country. He's going to upset, I suspect, quite a lot of people relying on selling capital for their income because there's going to be increasing capital gains tax. He's going to upset people who want to cascade their wealth down to their children and their children's children. I think there will be inheritance tax changes. Eventually they will upset people in the south of England because they're going to revalue council tax. And it desperately needs revaluation. But the impact of that will be, in effect, a transfer of resources from the richer parts of the south to the Midlands and the north of England and beyond into Wales. And that's absolutely essential, but will offend people. So I think there are lots of big fights to come. And my biggest worry about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, I don't think they have run towards the arguments they really needed to have run towards and won to give themselves the preparation for what they're going to have to do in office.
Here, one thing should be noticed. The way that a public servant rose and became the Prime Minister has roots in what he did as the Director of Public Prosecutions. Truss revealed a deep connection between Starmer's career and the national security establishment, which likely played a role in his eventual rise to the leadership of the Labour Party. Starmer's willingness to align with powerful institutions, both at home and abroad, allowed him to climb the political ladder, ultimately leading to his appointment as Prime Minister. Truss's findings raise serious questions about the extent to which Starmer's actions were shaped by personal ambition and his alignment with powerful forces, rather than by any commitment to public service or justice.
Sir Keir has positioned himself as the political reincarnation of Tony Blair, and Sir Tony was the man who always wanted to have us in a central place in Europe. Indeed, he even hoped to become president of the European Commission at one point. This migrant plan won't work, but it makes it clear that Labour cannot be trusted not to betray Brexit.
What do you think? Does the Labour Party have a secret agenda that is exactly the opposite to how it wants to portray itself? Do you think investigations should be done about what Starmer did as the Director of Public Prosecutions, where he gave concessions to elites? In the comments section right below, share your thoughts on whether Starmer has legitimacy after what Liz Truss revealed about him. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to get more updates on British politics and how events are changing it. Until the next video, stay tuned.